Hello and welcome to the Scientology Money Project on YouTube. We are part of the larger SPTV network across the internets. And I'm going to do a show today. What I'm going to do, hello Denise, welcome to the show. I didn't really do a lot of promotion of the show. I'm doing technical materials that are of use if you want to move forward with a lawsuit and some other things. Hey, Wayne. And I was going to do it just as a pre-record, but I really changed my mind and I wanted the interaction with the audience. I think that's more useful. This is some very technical stuff. It's going to be just background. And this fits with the Scientology Money Project of looking at some of the things that have went on, why Scientology got its tax exemption in the first place. And I wanted to just give a quick explanation. I'm not going to go as into the weeds as I was with the other history, because you have to appreciate there was a war between the Church of Scientology and the IRS from 1967, well, actually 57, through really 1993. Constant lawsuits. If you read litigation history of Scientology and the IRS and other governments, hi Tina, in the last 20. And I'd like the new hat. Oh yeah, I still have my other hat, but this is one. It was a nice day out today. Hello, Lauren. So there was a history of litigation. It's quite extensive and nasty, and it's going to show you why. If you want to revoke Scientology's tax exemption, you have to know what tax exemption is, how they got it, what you're specifically going after. Because to say we're going after Scientology's tax exemption, Scientology told the IRS that the Church of Scientology doesn't exist. In fact, the Church of Scientology is just a term of convenience, the church told the IRS, that refers to all the legally separate corporate churches. So Flag is legally separate from RTC, is legally separate from the Celebrity Center, is legally separate from the ship. So every part of Scientology is legally separate from every other part. That's to minimize their exposure in lawsuits to the government and all kinds of things. So when you say we want Scientology's tax exemption taken down, does that mean Church of Scientology Los Angeles or Portland or Hawaii or the whole thing? And if you want the whole thing, and that's what I think we all mean, then you have to know where to focus your efforts. And as an investigator, I'm saying here's how they got tax exemption, what it is, how to go after it. So I'm going to give some brief history of the in-game leading up to tax exemption. Scientology is a social mirage. It's a construct, certainly, but it's a multi-billion-dollar criminal enterprise. Now, it has a retail front end, so I'm not sure what I mean by social mirage. It's an actual legal entity. So I'm not sure, Adam, what you mean there. Oh, thank you. It is a nice hat. So the weather's improving. I was questioning you the other day, but in the end, we came to the same conclusion. I have a strategy and would love to talk more. Sure, you can email me and we can talk. So basically, we're going to get right into it, but I do want to, when you want to do something, you have to know what is your target. And so when you want to revoke Scientology's tax exemption, again, where is Scientology's tax exemption? Who possesses it? Given that every part of Scientology is legally separate from every other part. So how does the arrangement work, and who do you complain to? And but according to different groups, who is legally in charge of each? We'll get to there. Yeah, you have to go to the head of the snake. And it's not the Religious Technology Center. So I'm going to go up on the, okay, now this building here in LA is often called Big Blue, but we're going to talk about the other Big Blue, which is the IRS. Isn't that interesting that they're both the same color blue? That's just a coincidence, isn't it? Big Blue. If you're at the optometrist measuring glasses, I would say Big Blue, Big Blue, which is the IRS is infinitely bigger and more blue because it's the largest tax collection agency in the world. But it is interesting to see both of these Big Blue, Big Blue. So I put up John Gotti here for a reason, and this is a point I keep making over and over. Scientology did not cave in the IRS. They didn't do it. That thing, if you believe that, it doesn't fit the facts. John Gotti killed Paul Castellano and took over as boss of the Gambino crime family. So Gotti killed probably 7 people, probably more. I think 7 that they know of. But they actually got Gotti for tax fraud. He didn't file tax returns for 1984 through 1989. And what's interesting, if you're a gangster and you murder people, Gotti was also convicted of murder, conspiracy, racketeering, obstruction. But they got Al Capone, that they meaning the IRS, the feds, the FBI, they got him. So the 5 crime families were bigger than US Steel. So they were a gigantic business, and they had assassins and murderers, and the IRS and the FBI, Department of Justice, took them down. So Scientology was a nothing compared to the Gambino crime family. And what it controlled in Las Vegas, what it controlled in the unions, and how powerful it was. So that's a point I always hammer on. No, Scientology, that's a self-serving thing. Scientology likes to have people think that it could take on the IRS and win. It didn't take on the IRS and win. There was a negotiation. And this is important to reset the dialogue. Scientology didn't take on the IRS and win. That's self-serving Scientology BS. Scientology did not owe the IRS $1 billion, as David Miscavige claimed. It's probably down 300 million, maybe lower. I've crunched some numbers and some models, but they didn't owe him $1 billion. And Marty Rathbun has talked about tax exemption. I think he's not been truthful. I think parts of what he said, but Marty Rathbun's not credible. Some of what he says is, but Miscavige's story that they owed $1 billion, I don't buy it at all. The numbers that I've crunched aren't there. And Scientology, if you want to present the numbers showing you owed $1 billion, please post them publicly. Otherwise, your claim I consider just to be BS, like most of what you say, like 99% of what you say. So this page, TurboTax, it's funny. They put up a page of famous IRS tax criminals. So the fact that you could take down Gotti for tax fraud, and he's a murderer, he's a criminal, charge of a crime family, the Gambino crime family, no less. The fact that you can take him down because he didn't file tax returns, he certainly had a mob behind him. I mean, an actual organized crime mob that was powerful, and yet the IRS took down John Gotti. So David Miscavige would be jack shit compared to John Gotti, just nobody. He would be a nobody. So, yeah, they claimed Miscavige in his Wars Over speech claimed that they owed $1 billion. They didn't owe $1 billion in back taxes. And the fact that Miscavige would make that claim, he just used it to he pads, he brags. That's when they were also saying there were 12 million Scientologists. When Junch was saying there were 12 million Scientologists, not supported by the evidence. And I look at evidence, show me the real numbers. I'm an investigator. I have to make a case. So do you. We're all internet sleuths. I just have a license, so it's a little bit different. Now, but this is dated September 26, 1984, Washington Post. By 1984, the U.S. tax court, and in the U.S. we have a tax court. So we have a civil court, we have a criminal court, and we have a tax court for tax matters. And the original Church of Scientology of California, which I've been saying is the mother church, that's the original entity, CSC. The tax court rejected its tax exemption. It upheld the 1967 revocation by saying that the church made a business out of selling religion, and it ordered it to pay 1.4 million in back taxes for the years 70 through 72. So that number in Scientology is really strong. This period in late 60s through maybe middle 70s, Scientology is at its peak. That's probably peak Scientology, as we would call it, peak Scientology. And they only owed 1.4 million for 70 through 72, which were peak years, and I have the numbers that they earned for those. So they only owed 1.4 million. So if you do the math, they didn't owe $1 billion by 1993. The numbers just aren't there. So let's get rid of that bit of Miscavige BS. Now, here's the context of the 60s, 70s, 80s, and up to today. There's a sovereign citizen tax movement. And basically, the tax protest movement goes way back. I mean, it goes back to the foundations of America that you should have representation if you're going to be taxed. But there's a lot of people who said we shouldn't have to pay the income tax. I've always prefaced it with the income tax. And so the formal tax protest sovereign citizen movement really began to take form, national form, in the 1960s. In paragraph 2, you can see the tax protest movement began in the late 60s and still exists today. Its followers use pseudo-legal and frivolous arguments to falsely claim that most Americans do not actually have to pay federal taxes. And this goes into the anti-law, the posse comitatus movement. There were a lot of white nationalist Christian movements that didn't want to pay taxes, and they felt they shouldn't have to pay taxes. So this got bigger and bigger in the 80s. The anti-tax movement was really big. And I remember that period. I remember my grandfather talking about how we as Americans should pay income tax because we had roads, schools, we had water treatment plants, sewage systems, freeways. So my grandfather, my grandparents were more parents to me than my own parents, in many ways. So my grandparents were always talking about we should pay our fair share of taxes. And that's only right because we enjoy the benefits of society, including police, fire, unemployment if you lose your job. And so he's very much, I grew up in a very much pay what you owe. But, if you can take legitimate deductions, take those deductions and itemize your expenses, keep a record of all your books and pay what you owe and don't cheat on your taxes. In fact, my grandpa was very much, if you pay your taxes and don't break the law, the government will leave you alone. Now, conversely, we had other members of our family who were hellraisers who didn't want to pay taxes, and they didn't believe in the government. Yeah, and Adam, you make a point. The sovereign citizens each believe sovereign citizens also believe they each have a claim over $1 billion. Yeah, they try to write IOUs. Let's get off topic for a minute. Sovereign citizens believe that they are not their paper identity. They think that at birth, you get a birth certificate, so that's a paper identity, and the United States government uses it to borrow money against. They also believe that you're owed things. And we're going to do a Scientology sovereign citizen episode shortly because some new stuff is kicked up. And yeah. So anyway, I was raised in a very much pay your taxes environment. Don't overpay, don't underpay, be honest on your taxes because you don't want to get in trouble with the IRS. And that's a good, solid philosophy for me. And, even Grant Cardone says he takes every legitimate deduction he can get. But I think Grant's going down Grant's another topic. Um, okay, so this anti-tax movement, the government doesn't like it. The one thing the United States government does not like it is the government does not like it if you don't pay your taxes or you speak publicly about it. They will go after tax cheats and tax frauds to the greatest extent possible because the one thing the United States government needs is money and lots of it, and that comes in the form of taxes. Now, of course, there's the wealthy corporations who hire lobbyists to not pay any taxes. In fact, uh, President Reagan was once told that his own secretary that she paid more in income taxes than General Electric, which was shocking to the president. So during the 80s, the IRS was under a lot of scrutiny for two things: for um, really cranking down hard on ordinary people who wouldn't pay their taxes. They thought the IRS looked the other way at the big tax avoidance corporations like General Electric, Raytheon. There's a lot of the companies, some of whom who did business with the government didn't want to pay taxes. So the IRS was under a lot of pressure in the 1980s between tax protesters who felt that they were trying to ruin ordinary people. And you would see stories of grandma and grandpa kicked out of their house because they couldn't pay a tax lien. And the IRS was viewed as pretty brutal, and it was pretty brutal in the 80s, and it still can be extremely brutal. And I'm not even going to go into the DOJ or the DEA and tax forfeiture laws. So the government and money, the government wants its money, and there's a lot of people who don't want to pay the government money. So the government wanted to crush the tax protest sovereign citizen movement. But because it was intertwined with religion, this presented a secondary layer. So it was quite something, and it's continued on. The sovereign citizen movement. So that's the context, okay? And so what happened? If we go back in 1984, Church of Scientology dead ends to get tax exemption, and this is the mother church. This was before Scientology had split itself into a million pieces. It was only maybe 5 to 12 big corporations. But by 1984, they failed in tax court. They would go on to sue more. So 84, they weren't going to get tax exemption. And they needed, the church needed tax exemption, not just, and this is a misnomer I want to protect. Yes, it's nice to have your parishioners be able to deduct the cost of their Scientology services. That was certainly an important part of why Scientology needed tax exemption. But I argue that more importantly, the Church of Scientology wanted tax exemption so that it had First Amendment religious protections, because it's a criminal organization. And if it could get religious protections, it could say that things were religiously protected. The IRS argued that paying for auditing services was a quid pro quo, which you can't do in religion. You can't get a quid pro quo. And so the churches over time created something called intangible spiritual benefit, where you could donate money for an intangible spiritual benefit. So there's always workarounds. There's always fuckery. But at that time, they basically said, nope, you're not getting it. And so Scientology, recognizing that there was a lot of hellraising, a lot of hellraisers, especially in the South, they played into that. So Scientology created a couple front groups. And this one, CATS, Citizens for an Alternative Tax System. This was founded in 1990 toward the end game. So a lot of fighting went on between the tax court decision in 84. A lot of things happened. But in 1990, Scientologist and attorney Stephen Hayes, and you can Google him, he's still around, he started Citizens for an Alternative Tax. He began working on Capitol Hill, speaking out. You can see old screenshots from C-SPAN. He's like Scientology's lobbyist, Greg Mitchell, of the Mitchell firm in DC, who lobbies for Scientology. But Greg Mitchell actually works a lot of the interfaith groups to try to work with the other smaller churches and get support for Scientology and some of these other scummy churches. And so Stephen Hayes led this big group, and it got to be pretty big, and they were hooked up with Lyndon LaRouche, and some other groups, Unification Church, some people in the Latter-day Saints. So this became a thing of where we shouldn't pay taxes. What we should do, what Stephen Hayes was arguing for, citizens for an abolish the IRS and just institute a national flat tax. And there are different numbers were thrown around. One of it was like a 10% tax on everything and get rid of the IRS, just 10% tax on everything. There was one group that proposed a 23% flat tax. But generally it was viewed as like, we can get rid of the IRS. So if you just pay a national sales tax of 10%, not counting state tax, but every time you go to buy something, you pay 10% on it to the government. So if I bought this brand of iced tea and it's $2, I would pay 20 cents to the government. So if everything you did, you paid the government 10%, the argument went, we don't need the IRS because the national sales tax would more than make up for it. And so if General Electric bought titanium to make fan blades for jet engines, it would pay a tax on that. So everybody, every individual and every corporation would just pay a flat 10%. And there's some merit to that argument. I mean, if you crunch the numbers, do you really need the IRS? If everything was taxed. So Scientology leaned into this to put pressure on the IRS. And they were a front group. And the IRS recognized they were a front group, but they were a public pressure group. They wanted to put pressure on the IRS along with the other anti-tax groups that were not Scientology related. And yes, so Stephen Hayes, by the way, I in covering GPB Capital, the Scientologist owned $1.7 billion Ponzi scheme. By the way, the owner, Scientologist David Gentile, his criminal trial will start here in June in New York, Eastern District. And my opinion, they've got him solid on one count of wire fraud. An update on that. One of the three defendants flipped, and that would be, Jeff Lash flipped, took a 10-year sentence, 120 months. They have David Gentile on just one count of wire fraud, 240 months. They could sentence him on the max. And he's trying to suppress the fruits of the search warrant of his partner's trying to suppress the fruits of the search warrant, as is David. He's going down. I think it's sort of like Gotti. John Gotti's lawyer even said after John died that John Gotti told me, look, I know they've got me on this last murder thing, whatever they had him on. John said, look, I know they've got me. Just buy me as much time as you can so I can spend it with my family. I think that's what David Gentile is doing. I think they know they have him, or he might be delusional and think he can beat the charges, but just on that one wire fraud, they have him. In my opinion, it's incontrovertible. So back to anti-tax movement. So what I want to say about Stephen Hayes is when David Gentile tried to take back over GPB Capital because it had gone into a monitorship, he tried to use two Scientologists, and then he tried to Stephen Hayes got in the mix too to try to take the company back over just so that Gentile could seize control of it. So Stephen Hayes has been an old hell-raising Scientologist from way back, and there you go. Now, this is another picture. He's Stephen Hayes is the chairman and president of a current group called Americans for Fair Taxation. So he's still very much banging away. The old Citizens, the old CATS group ended in 2005, but if you go to fairtax.org, that's Stephen Hayes there. He's still got an anti-tax group. And, so he's still there, but Scientology was exerting a lot of pressure through the old cats, and they were really sticking it to the IRS, which the IRS didn't like. The IRS doesn't like tax scofflaws or tax rebels. Now, cats, it was a Scientology front group. They were financing it, and it was designed to exert negative public pressure on the IRS. And CATS was created to call for the IRS to be abolished and replaced with a national flat tax. So you had this pressure after Scientology, the Church of Scientology of California was denied tax exemption. And this is something, now, this I will put on my blog. You don't have to read it all. But basically, what happened, there was a U.S. Supreme Court, a case that went all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court, and it was called the United States versus Zolan. And basically, as I've been told by an old GO crim, old Guardian's Office criminal, it's just the hep way to say it is an old GO crim. Some Guardian's Office types, Scientologist types, I don't know, I think the GO was gone by then, but they made a recording in their lawyer's office, and they were actually talking about crimes they had committed against the United States government. And this tape fell into the hands of the IRS. It's called the Zolan tape. And you can Google this story. I'm going to put it back up. And the IRS wanted to get it. And, this was retribution for the IRS looking into the tax returns of Hubbard and David Miscavige. And it wanted to get these tape recordings. And Mary Sue Hubbard sued. And you can see these third paragraph down. The government argued that there was a crime fraud exemption to attorney-client privilege. And it basically, the IRS knew that they had evidence of bad faith claims, and they wanted to get this proof of Scientology openly talking about crimes in a legal office where this got recorded, and somehow the tape found its way to the government. So this case, you can see it was argued in 1989, decided June 21, 1989, there at the top. So as we approach Scientology getting tax exemption, it's fighting at the Supreme Court. It has anti-tax groups going, and it's not just cats, but that's the main one. Smash that like, folks, please. Thank you, Paul on the Go. Good to see you here. Good to see you. So what the church did, August 13, 1991, my green arrow should be lower. So 1991, this is how bad the fight gets. The Scientologists sue 17 IRS officials. These are senior IRS officials. They accuse them of waging a 33-year campaign against the organization and a large number of its members. So there's 17 key influential IRS officials, and they were sued, and they won $120 million. This was in the period where Miscavige also sued Time Magazine for, what was it, $465 million. And I'm going to share this article. Let me share the screen. So they're going big, It's a case of, this is the LA Times. Now, this is the actual article. And I have an LA Times subscription and non-endorsement of the paper. I'm just saying I like to keep up on things locally. Now, this lawsuit, and I'll post the link to it on my blog. This would allow the Church of Scientology, if this went forward, it would allow the Church of Scientology to depose these IRS officials. And this was some payback from David Miscavige, because he in the mid-1980s, they conducted a criminal tax investigation against Scientology founder L. Ron Hubbard, but also David Miscavige was in the mix, as I've mentioned, whose death in '86 ended the probe. Well, to a comment, Miscavige hired Jerry Pfeffer, top white-collar criminal lawyer who had defended Leona Helmsley in the '80s, and his wife was, of course, Monique Yingling. So he got a twofer there. Now, look, this is so Scientology. The suit alleges that IRS agents in Los Angeles, and that would have been the Criminal Investigation Division, along with a former church member, that would have been Jerry Armstrong, schemed to plant forged documents in the Church of Scientology's files, which the IRS could then seize in a raid. And this was part of, this gets into Jerry Armstrong's story and him being filmed in Griffith Park, being secretly filmed by former dirty LAPD cop Eugene Ingram, who was fired for a whole bunch of nasty stuff. like Gene Ingram, if you Google the shit he was up to. God. So at the same time, the suit alleges there was collusion between the IRS exempt organization and Criminal Investigation Division, in which phony tax exemption proceedings were conducted to covertly gather information for the IRS criminal probe. Oh, is this rich? L. Ron Hubbard said that the criminal protest that which he is doing. So in Snow White, the Church of Scientology, the Guardian's office, broke into the IRS offices in DC, wiretapped the IRS, and now the church is whining that the IRS was covertly gathering information against them. Well, this is where you have to be able to see Scientology bullshit. The U.S. government can get a warrant and they can covertly gather information on you if they suspect you of criminal activity. That's called law enforcement. It's called law enforcement. The IRS had every damn right to collect covertly information on Scientology. Scientology is complaining about it. Scientology doesn't have a right to break into the U.S. government's offices to commit burglary, breaking and entering, theft of government documents, espionage, domestic espionage. And I actually talked to someone in the Guardian's office. I'm not going to mention his name. And I've talked to more than one person, but was one GO guy I fell falling out with. And I liked him. We just had a falling out over something. And, I hope he's doing well. We just had a falling out that was unfortunate. But, that happens. I've talked to more than one Scientologist who believe that the church had a right to break into the IRS to find out what the feds had on them. And that's any criminal will want to know what the cops have on them or the feds. So in this lawsuit, the lawsuit is really interesting to read. Additionally, the church complains that the LA IRS district office planned to deny several Scientology churches tax exemption for the express purpose of causing a final halt and the ultimate disintegration of Scientology. And yeah, no kidding. I got to tell you, these senior IRS guys saw the Scientology for the criminal cult it was. And it says Monday's suit represents the latest chapter in the lengthy battle between the church and the IRS. In the past, the IRS has revoked the tax-exempt status of various Scientology organizations, accusing them of operating in a commercial manner and of financially benefiting private individuals. Correct, that happened. So this thing, Scientology attorney William T. Drescher said that a victory in the suit would offer all American churches inviolable protection from illegal government intrusions into their legal affairs. Well, no, what Drescher is saying is that churches wanted to do all kinds of financial fuckery and they wanted protection. So what Drescher is saying there is Scientology wanted to have its cake and eat it too. That if it won this lawsuit, it could engage in the financial rape and pillage of its founders, of its members, and it could engage in all kinds of financial shenanigans and claim First Amendment protection. So this is a typical case of Scientology wanting unfair advantages, have its cake and eat it too. They don't want any oversight while they're using child labor, while they're destroying children, and they're destroying their parents' finances and everything else. The Reverend Heber C. Jensch, president of the Church of Scientology International, said that Scientology's long history of exposing IRS abuse of power has resulted in prolonged retaliation by the agency. In my previous broadcast, I showed you the press release from the day July 8, 1977, when the FBI had 112 agents raid Scientology. Scientology then put out a press release saying that this was just government retaliation for exposing the government's involvement in selling drugs. So this is an interesting article, but I just am laying out the groundwork for how they got tax exemption before David Miscavige and Mark Rathbun walked into the IRS office. So this lawsuit, again, this article is dated August 13, 1991. So that's when the IRS sues. Now, there's a tactical reason I'll go into why this lawsuit was launched against 17 senior IRS officials. And there's a reason to get these guys sued. And that will be explained. Oh, wait a minute. Oh, I have to stop sharing that. Hold a minute. I was just confused. Okay, we're going to go back to slides. Okay, now you can see that this lawsuit was August 13, 1991. The next section down, October 1991, just 2 months later, the key officials of the church, David Miscavige and Mark Rathbun, approached the service seeking to negotiate the resolution and met with the commissioner. So what the church does is it sues these 17 senior officials who are all opposed to Scientology and giving it any tax exemption. It sues them. And then it walks into the IRS. Then David Miscavige. So they sue, the church sues 17 senior officials. Why not 25? Why not 30 officials? Well, they sued the senior IRS officials, including the director, exempt organizations. And what this would force them to do is to recuse themselves going forward in an investigation. And to me, this was part of Jerry Pfeffer and Monique's strategy, because they had worked for the U.S. government before they went into private practice. I believe Jerry Pfeffer had worked for Treasury, as had Monique. So both Monique Yingling and her late husband, Jerry Pfeffer, had worked for the U.S. Treasury, and they knew how to play the game. Plus, they had hired Meade Emery as a consultant, who had been a former senior IRS official, and he knew how to play the game. So if you can get rid of these 17 troublemakers who are blocking it, and then you can have the commissioner basically restrict what the auditors can look at in tax exemption, you could cripple it. So you're gonna rig the game. You're gonna rig the game, and this lawsuit is a very important part of it. So this is how Scientology is beginning to outmaneuver the IRS. They're not threatening them or intimidating. And I've said before, the 2,500 individual lawsuits filed by individual Scientologists were nothing, because those could have been put into one lawsuit, as I've said, and those would have been consolidated into a class lawsuit. And because Scientology had been denied tax exemption, those could have been shot down. I think, and I can't speak for Mark Rathbun, but I think when Marty says that the IRS wanted all the lawsuits turned off, and Marty said, we'll turn them off like a faucet. I think they were talking about the 17 lawsuits. And I don't even know if what Marty's saying is true, because he's not credible. Marty Rathbun has a credibility problem. So I don't even know how he related that he could turn off the lawsuits like a faucet. I don't know if I can believe that at all. I would have to see the IRS records. And so I don't know. Psych on the rocks. Well, I didn't know they convinced the members the government raided because they were doing good things. Yeah, I don't know why I'm surprised. Maybe because they said it involved drugs. No, they said that two things. They said that they were about to expose the government's involvement in selling narcotics, and in the French Connection from the 70s, of which a movie was made with Gene Hackman was in it, The French Connection. And then they also said that all that the Guardian's Office criminals did was to steal government copier paper. They said that's all they did. They were going into the office just to see what the government had. So you were going into the government office at night, the IRS offices at night, just going in there like it wasn't burglary or breaking and entering, like it wasn't a felony. And you were just kind of taking folders out of locked file cabinets with lock picks, because in the Guardian's office hat pack, your job description, you were taught how to pick locks. So you'd go in and break into offices, and you would copy the files on the government copiers. And so you'd copies and you'd put the government's folders back. So they made it sound like, oh, the government offices, you can just walk into a government office and copy their folders. And we got in trouble for taking government copier paper. That's all we did. That was what they told members. I got told that by Gunter. And having worked at Hughes Aircraft as a technical writer myself out of college, I work with a lot of government copier paper. And if a worker took some government copier paper, it's like people took office supplies. You might, hey, knock it off. They might ask you to pay it back, but they're not going to criminally charge you. But if you copied government information, especially defense information, you would go to prison. We were briefed on all the espionage statutes. So yeah, they really tried to play it down. It's like on the rocks. We were going to expose the government for its involvement in narcotics, and they raided us. And they got us on taking government copier paper. They really played it down, and credulous Scientologists believed it. So they set these guys up so that they can eliminate them from the next part of the phase. Now, this is 1993. Toward the end of approval, this thing went through court where they denied the Church of Spiritual Technology their tax exemption. So what I want to do, so anyway, you can see there was a series as it came down to the end game. One other thing happened, and I thought I had it up here and I don't. I'm just going to show you one other interesting thing I want you to read. Douglas France has written the definitive article on the subject, and I would like you all to read this. I'm going to share it, but this is like one of the definitive pieces. But I think Mr. France, I think he misses part of the story, but he wrote it in 96. Scientology basically gets tax exemption, but let me see. Hold on a minute. I'm having a StreamYard thing. Okay. This is the New York Times article, and this is so worth reading if you're interested in the subject, and I think you should read it. It's called it's an article from March 9, 1997 by Douglas France. You can see I've highlighted it there. Scientology's puzzling journey from tax rebel to tax exempt. And France does a knockout. Mr. France does a knockout job. And he said that he begins on October 8, 1993. 10,000 cheering Scientologists thronged the LA sports arena to celebrate the most important milestone in the church's recent history, victory in its all-out war against the IRS. And France did some digging into this. And what happened is the New York Times leaked the final closing agreement between the IRS and Scientology. It was secret. And I'm going to share it with you and post it on my blog. And France talks about how it shocked tax experts, and it saved the church tens of millions of dollars in taxes, not billions. More significantly, the decision was an invaluable public relations tool in Scientology's worldwide campaign for acceptance. So on the basis of the ruling, the State Department formally criticized Germany for discriminating against Scientologists. So you can see there was a trickle-down effect. There were a lot of benefits it got. And I think this was, I'm not going to get political, but Bill Clinton, I think President Clinton was really dirty in this. And that goes to my, view of, I don't want to get political, but if you know what happened to Mina And, the Air America story, Richard Reese, senior CS flag, was President Clinton's roommate in college before when Bill Clinton was a frat boy. So the New York Times found a series of unusual internal IRS actions that came after an extraordinary campaign orchestrated by Scientology against the agency who worked there. That's why I showed you the $120 million lawsuit against 17 officials, the creation of Citizens for an Alternative Tax. So the New York Times conducted 30 interviews and looked at thousands of pages of public records. And then, they were able to get the final closing agreement, which was secret. So we do know that Scientology hired PIs to snoop on IRS officials. And so that's documented in there. Jerry Pfeffer tried to defend it by saying, well, we can hire PIs. And then the decision, Fred Goldberg met with Mr. Miscavige and Mr. Rathbun, and he set it up. But after that, this is the most important thing. This is if you're going to look for corruption, my number one suspect would be Fred Goldberg. After the meeting, that is, with Miscavige and Marty, where they were going to halt Scientology's lawsuits in exchange for tax exemption, which would be a quid pro quo. I don't even know if that's legal. After that meeting, Mr. Goldberg created a special committee to negotiate a settlement with Scientology outside normal agency procedures. When the committee determined that all Scientology entities should be exempt from taxes, IRS tax analysts were ordered to ignore the substantive issues in reviewing the decision, according to the IRS memorandum in the court files. And then, of course, the IRS, who hoped this would be secret until it was leaked, wouldn't say anything. But we know from Mr. France's work, we're indebted to him, that he ordered the tax analysts to ignore substantive issues. So Fred Goldberg limited the scope of what his people could do. He tied their hands behind their back, wouldn't let them look into the big issues. And he also, those 17 senior officials who opposed it were taken out of play because they were being sued. So if it looks like corruption, it looks like maybe Fred Goldberg advised it, maybe Mead Emery, maybe Jerry Pfeffer, maybe all the above said, hey, take out these 17 key people and then restrict what the analysts can find him. Voila, you'll find that there's nothing wrong. So this was all rigged, and it looks dirty. It's as dirty as hell. It actually is pretty vile. I think it's corruption more than intimidation. I think ordinary corruption answers the question. And Fred Goldberg, I've written him a few times. A lot of people have. He will not say anything about anything because really the IRS commissioner is a revolving door job because you want to move on up to Treasury. Hopefully be Treasury Secretary or Assistant Secretary. You want to move up from the IRS to Treasury. So the IRS just clammed up, for lack of a better term. Mr. Goldberg, who left the IRS as commissioner in January 1992 to become an assistant secretary at the U.S. Treasury Department, said privacy laws prohibited him from discussing Scientology or his impromptu meeting with Mr. Miscavige. Well, that's certainly very convenient. And so he's like one of my suspects. And he's always been everybody's suspect. What did he do? What did he do? So anyway, that article I will post on my blog. Now, what happened is the New York Times, there's a document here. Where do I have it? Okay. What happened when they did a final closing agreement? So whatever, by restraining the IRS analysts to very superficial issues and not looking at the big issues, and Scientology had to submit a lot of documentation, and Monique Yingling makes a big deal out of like 6 feet of documents, but I have it. I have one 279-page document I'll post. The IRS asked Scientology a lot of questions, and the questions were very trivial. They're just very, very trivial softball questions. They didn't ask them about L. Ron Hubbard's fraud or what David Miscavige had engaged in. By the way, one thing I wanted to add during this period, Terry Gamboa, the sister of Janice Grady, Terry Gamboa was a messenger, and she and her husband Fernando. Terry Gamboa was a trustee for life at the Church of Spiritual Technology, and she at one time had been David Miscavige's senior in the church. Well, in order to get her out of any of the IRS investigations, operatives were hired to. They offered Terry and her late husband Fernando a job running a horse ranch in Australia, and I believe Australia. And Terry and Fernando loved horses, and they took the job. They thought it was just a regular job, and they had left Sea Org. And so David Miscavige, by getting Terry out of the country, he took out one of the key people who the IRS could have questioned about the financial irregularities at the top. So that's the kind of complexity that went on, and maybe sometime Terry will come on and talk about it. And Miscavige was very thorough, and it wasn't just him, because he's only smart enough to hire the right people. The theory that made Mead Emery was a plan, and he took over the IRS. That just didn't happen. So this is the closing agreement. I want to show it. A lot of people will have never seen this. This was leaked by the New York Times, and it's want you to get a look and feel for it. Where is it at? Oh, here it is. Okay. Now, I have the actual document copy of it. It has the black stripes across the bottom, which belong to the IRS. But this 65-page document was a confidential thing the IRS never wanted the public to see. And this talks about how it goes down. And it does mention that David Miscavige and Mark Rathbun approached the service to meet with the commissioner. And this basically spells out the terms and conditions to get tax exemption. And if you really want to get involved in asking the IRS to revoke tax exemption, this I suggest you educate yourself about. Just go through it, familiarize yourself with the document. If you're a tax expert, I'll send it to you. Be glad to meet with you. But one thing the church had to agree to was to create a church tax compliance committee. And this required, I think, 5 years of reporting through the CTCC. Had to be tax compliance. But the church, among other things that I find objectionable, the church agreed to stop its lawsuits against the IRS, and agreed to stop its anti-tax activities. And in fact, the first thing that happened when Scientology got tax exemption, David Miscavige ordered a booklet to go out to all Scientologists saying you have to get your taxes in order. A lot of Scientologists hadn't been paying taxes or had been objecting to the non-deductibility of their donations to the church for auditing. And so Miscavige said, we have tax exemption. You get your taxes cleaned up with the IRS now, or you will be declared a suppressive person and thrown out of the church. So clean it up now. If you have a problem, you'll be taken up auditing right away. You can't get your precious auditing. And if you don't clean it up, you're a suppressive person. So Miscavige shifted from Citizens for Alternative Tax to terrorize the IRS and put pressure on it to we're good, tax-paying, honest Scientologists who can now deduct our payments for auditing. And later they could deduct the IES. So this document is just a wealth of details. And I remember once I was talking to the IRS, and I had the actual version with the black stripe across the bottom. And They wanted to know where I got it. Where did you get that document? I had some of their Scientology's production documents. I had this document. And I said, the New York Times leaked it. So I'd like a document with 500 pages of what Scientology, some of their things they told it. And this is where the church agreed to pay $12,500,000 to settle everything. And so this just lays out in great detail what tax exemption is. So basically what happened is that the new corporate mother church, the Church of Scientology International, this is important here. This is the target. The Church of Scientology International was given tax exemption, and it was an umbrella tax exemption. So all other entities were given tax exemption based on the Church of Scientology International getting tax exemption. That's it in a nutshell. So if you're going to target a group for tax exemption, it's the Church of Scientology International. I'll post the EIN number, the employee, the taxpayer identification number on my blog. So that's what we want to go after. If you want Scientology's tax exemption to end, is Church of Scientology International, because everything from there became a blanket. So RTC, CST, all the other churches got umbrella exemption because of CSI. So when you say you want the IRS to revoke the Church of Scientology's tax exemption, specifically it's the Church of Scientology International, because if they lose their tax exemption, then the whole umbrella, all the other entities under CSI covered by the umbrella tax exemption also lose tax exemption. So that's the specific targeting. Those are your tasking and targeting orders as activists to call peaceably for them to lose their tax exemption. That's why you need to know who to go after. That's who to complain to. Back to the document, and we're not going to spend any time on it. It's just I'll post it on my blog today. But it talks about all the other groups that will get, so the IRS agreed to stop looking into the tax exempt status of these groups, and they were going to deny all these other groups. So it's a very comprehensive document, a lot of interesting details. Some lawyers out there who are smarter than me, look through it. You could find something a lot smarter than me. The Zolan case, which I referenced earlier, the service agreed to drop going after Zolan, which apparently had some admissions of criminal activity between Scientologists and their attorneys, and that they were going to return the Zolan materials. I'd like to get the Zolan materials. But Zolan was so important because I think it was the rope the IRS could have used to hang the church or the U.S. government. If they could have gotten past the crime fraud exemption. And that went all the way to the Supreme Court. So that was part of what Miscavige was worried about, certain pending cases. So they basically agreed to stop the wars. But there's something I want to show you in this. But look at all the entities. Look at all the entities in the code and the complexity of this. And certainly Monique Yingling was the architect of tax exemption, in my opinion. Marty claimed to be a big part of it, but later Monique slapped him in a video and said that he was nothing but a bag carrier. I think he was more than that, along with David Miscavige. Now, there was a picture in, I believe it was Going Clear, where the IRS officials were jumping up and down, celebrating with Miscavige, and I can't find the picture. Scientology's done a good job of scrubbing Google Images. But look at this detail. And this is what went out to the public. And the IRS launched an intense investigation to see who leaked it. And they couldn't find out who leaked it. So someone in the IRS, thank you for leaking this, because the public knows of all the fuckery between the Church of Scientology International and the IRS. All the dirty deeds, and Fred Goldberg will likely go to his grave and keep that secret. I don't know what he got out of it, but he did rig it. He really did rig it in that lawsuit for 120 million. That's my opinion, that he rigged it by, and another word I would say, he constrained it. He constrained IRS analysts to say you can only look at these trivial things and you can't look at the substantial things. That's what, according to Douglas Franz. So this is kind of the stuff we get into at the Scientology, or I get into at the Scientology Money Project. And then there's all kinds of rules and going on. But I wanted to take you down as we're scrolling to the signatories, to who actually signed this. And then I'm going to show you one more thing, and then we'll take some questions. So blah, 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 blah. There's a lot here. Definitions, codes. This is so amazing. Scientology will hate this. Now, I'd like this to be widely circulated in social media. And since it was leaked, have at it. But okay, so who signs for it? Who signs? Who signs the bottom? Okay, other matters. Rules of construction. There's a clause in here that we really want to focus on. H, finality. This agreement, meaning between the IRS and the Church of Scientology International, is final and conclusive, except the matter it relates to may be reopened in the event of fraud, malfeasance, or misrepresentation of material facts. That's where I think you focus on. We focus on. Tax exemption can be reopened in the event of fraud, malfeasance, or misrepresentation. And I think we can show that during the time of tax exemption and subsequent to, there was fraud, malfeasance, and misrepresentation of material facts. I would take this section out of it because there's clearly fraud, malfeasance, and misrepresentation. And the fact that the IRS refused to comment on it, this is something maybe Fred Goldberg could be subpoenaed on. And there's probably a list of 12 people I have that could be subpoenaed. But this is what you want to focus on. You also want to focus on the U.S. doctrine of illegality, which means if you're engaged in illegal activity, you don't get tax exemption. So violating public policy, that means breaking the law, disqualifies you for tax exemption. And I think with all the law breaking, the Chase Wave credit card fraud, the abuse of the second and third gen, there's a lot of things that we can complain to the IRS about. But now I'm going to show you something that no one's ever talked about, but I'm going to talk about it. It's something you need to know about. And this is where you want to go to in addition to the IRS. This, I don't think it's ever been seen by the public. And it's something I want to share with you. This is where I think we need to focus on illegal activity and public policy. Oh, yes, exactly. Illegality and public policy violations. But if you're looking at the actual agreement, you can go back into the agreement, into that final closing settlement. And at least you know what went on in the construction of that. So that's part of it. DOJ, yeah, all the agencies. But now I'm going to do the big reveal that I think is very important. So let me get my tab. Here's an agency. Okay, here is an agency I want you to know about. And this is what I would lead an effort to. I'd raise money for. If you want to do a lawsuit, I'd be glad to get involved. Look, this is called the U.S. Treasury Inspector General for Tax Administration. It's called TIGTA, T-I-G-T-A. It's an official website of the U.S. government. And you can see that in little print, an official website of the United States government at top. Now, the IRS has an inspector general. It has an oversight committee above it. So you can go to the inspector general and say, hey, the IRS is not doing its job with Scientology. I want you to look into Scientology because the IRS refuses to. IRS exempt organizations refuses to look into all the law breaking by the Church of Scientology. and you can contact us. You can be a whistleblower and get protections. If you worked for the church and you have evidence of criminality, TIGTA, the US government, and not the IRS, but the actual Inspector General for Tax Administration, this is an important office, US Treasury Inspector General for Tax Administration, TIGTA. You can get whistleblower protection. Okay. You can, and so you can go, you don't need to go to the FBI, you go to the Inspector General because the FBI is not sophisticated in taxes. So the Office of Investigations, and you would go there to get advice. They have offices throughout the country. And so I would say saddle up, study the final closing agreement, make a list of law-breaking criminal activity, including the Chase Wave credit card fraud. There's the Office of the Chief Counsel. And this is something no one's ever talked about in my research. I've talked to several experts, and I finally got an answer of TIGTA, the Inspector General, who's in charge of this is an agency that has power to investigate IRS malfeasance, misconduct, or why it's not doing its job. We as taxpayers pay the IRS to do its job, and that includes looking into a criminal cult's tax exemption. And they have subpoena power. They can do quite a bit of stuff. So the Office of the Legal Counsel, they have power over the IRS to compel the IRS. You can also go to the IRS Commissioner exempt organizations, Secretary of the Treasury, but they're not too busy. They're too busy. I mean, Secretary of the Treasury, Janet Yellen's biggest economy in the world, she's not going to like look at Scientology, I don't think. She should morally, but now you know where to go. And I want this promoted. I need the help of second and third gens and the public and the never ends and everyone. We all have a vested interest. Now look, right now there's a lot of controversy going on, and I understand it. I have my own opinion on it, but the common thing we do share is we want Scientology to lose its tax exemption. So you go after Church of Scientology International. That's who has the car keys. If they lose it, all the other groups lose it because it's an umbrella, as I explained. You go to the Treasury Inspector General for Tax Administration, TIGTA. You go to them. You go to contact them, and they have their offices throughout the country. And let's get back then. So if you go to TIGTA offices, you'll see you can find your local office. I popped this out. We should have offices. They have offices in all the major cities, basically. They have one in Los Angeles. So my plan is to, use this avenue. And since we have so many smart people, um, in the anti-Scientology movement, here's the acting inspector general, Heather M. Mills. You can certainly reach out to our acting inspector general of TIGTA, deputy inspector general for audit. And she conducts independent oversight audits of the Internal Revenue Service. This is important. If we need a new best friend, it would be Miss Hill. So you can reach out to her office to get direction on how to proceed. And like I said, there's plenty of people out there with a lot of money. And what we need, those of us who want to see Scientology lose its tax exemption, we need someone with money to fund a lawsuit, maybe $1 million to start. Create a private foundation whose goal is to finance litigation against the Church of Scientology through TIGTA, get them to act, and maybe there's several legal strategies to do this. But basically, Bob Minton, who had a lot of money to fund litigation, and he was certainly critical in financing Lisa McPherson and exposing her murder at the hands of Scientology. There's plenty of people out there with money, and plenty of people willing to do a lot of work. So we just need a lot of people donating some money. It could be done under the auspices of SPTV Foundation or another foundation related to, but it would have a common purpose and a good leadership, legal counsel, and it would be targeted solely to get the Church of Scientology International's tax exemption revoked, investigated, at least start getting investigated. And then all the evidence could come in and they could hear the evidence because there's formalities to do this, and I'm not going to go into it. And do you have a link to the IRS document you were showing us earlier? Well, there's not a link per se. I've got a pretty clean, I'm going to post it on my blog, Lisa. When I get done with the show, you'll see this video, and then you'll actually see the final closing agreement document. And then I might do another show on and because of arbitrations crap, it would be best for never ends to make the claims. Well, that's where we need a lawyer to find out who has standing, and this could be a public interest lawsuit. This is why we need lawyers, tax lawyers. Marcy Hamilton is an expert. I don't know if she'd be available to this at all. I don't know. I don't know Marcy. So I'll post it, but that's it in a nutshell. So you see how this war got to an end game where it was a rigged system, and the 17 senior officials were sued. Fred Goldberg rigged the system, according to Doug France. And so I think corruption is a much better answer than intimidation, because like I said, they took down, the IRS helped take down the 5 mafia families. So Scientology was nothing to them. What the IRS got out of it was an end to harassment, by anti-tax groups, which they don't like. And but there's something more to it we don't know about. I think there's something criminal, which would better explain it. Maybe something like bribery or corruption. In my mind, my opinion, bribery and corruption would explain it better than intimidation. Because really, if you're IRS Criminal Investigation Division and you're armed law enforcement, IRS Criminal Investigation is the armed law enforcement branch of the IRS. And they go after organized crime, and they're not afraid of some goons with e-meters, someone like David Miscavige. They're not afraid of it. That's why, for my opinion, corruption and bribery would explain it much better than intimidation, because some goons with e-meters who fucked up in Operation Snow White, no, they're not going to do it. They don't even know how to do burglaries correctly, for fuck's sake. Document posted 10 years ago. Yeah. On blog post of April 23. Well, we're at, I'll post the blog, Michael. Yeah, it's been posted around. I'm just saying I can put it on my blog, and I'll post a link to Doug Fran's story. You can post in the comments to the Scientology Money Project and anything. So yeah, come out with your cans up. Yeah, put the cans down, Xenu. Come out. So anyway, now you know how they got tax exemption. What you need to target is Church of Scientology International. You can go to the Inspector General of the IRS if you don't like what the IRS is doing, and I think you should go to TIGTA and ask, we as a group. And how this forms is through organic grassroots movement. So through YouTube, through Instagram, through education. And the nice thing about this movement is anybody, anytime, anywhere can just come in and really start amping it up and bringing more power to this movement to take down Scientology. I like what Pearl Snappy is doing. So many people, so many new players. I like what they're doing. Yeah, Pearl Snappy. This is the nice thing. You enter the stream at any time. It doesn't matter. You don't have to be old guard. You can be new guard, never in. You can be an interested tax lawyer who says, yeah, I'm up for it. You can be a multimillionaire who will say, you know what, I'm going to step up and finance this thing. I have $1 million to put into a foundation as social justice. You could be someone whose family has been affected by Scientology. Maybe one of your kids got recruited in the Sea Org and you're pissed off. And you have $1 million you can donate to it. To tell David Miscavige to stick it, where the sun doesn't shine. So Monique Yingling has said, she bragged that the church will never lose its tax exemption. Oh, Monique, we'll see, like to see you in court sometime being deposed in a court of law over what you know about this. I would love to see a lawsuit where Monique Yingling is deposed and David Miscavige is deposed. Oh, just let me go back before I forget, because I promised to show you one thing and I cannot fail. Let me go back, please. I wanted to show you the signatories on this Scientology document, because you want to know who was signing this thing. And so let me go back before we end. So who are the people that sign this? Okay, so it can be reopened. I once asked a top attorney, can we reopen this? And he said, I don't know. We'd have to go to court. But they're on H finality. Okay, so who signs off for the church? David Miscavige, as a member of the church tax compliance committee. Norman F. Starkey, deceased. Mark Rathbun, available for deposition. Heber Jensch, still alive, but as I understand, he's in an assisted memory facility. That's what I hear through the grapevine. Heber's in an assisted living. That is, he maybe Alzheimer's, I don't know. Mark Yeager, Watchdog Committee member at large. Jonathan Epstein, I believe Jonathan Epstein was an attorney who is deceased. I could be wrong. And then we had Nigel Oakes, who I believe is still around. Mark Rathbun signed it. Again, there's Heber signing it. And then some POA, power of attorney. That just means that, for example, Church of Spiritual Technology was signed with a power of attorney, probably by Heber Jensch. I don't know who had the power of attorney. Maybe David Miscavige. Signing for the Internal Revenue Service was John E. Burke, Assistant Commissioner, Employee Plans and Exempt Organizations. The IRS is divided into two parts: IRS, regular IRS, and then IRS exempt organizations, EO. So those are like tax exempt organizations. And that's a term you need to know. Scientology is covered under Church of Scientology, tax exempt organizations. And then the Commissioner of the Internal Revenue, James J. McGovern, signed. There's a list of exhibits that I can't get, weren't leaked, but now you have it there. Think that it needs to be kept simple. Scientology would like to baffle them with their BS and drag it on. Well, you can only get away with that for so long. And wow, Monique needs to watch her words. Pride comes before a fall. It sure does. Pride cometh before a fall, but that's what she has said. Where does Jerry Armstrong come into all this now? He really doesn't. Let me put it this way. Jerry Armstrong's lawsuit will not end tax exemption. His lawsuit, respectfully, Jerry Armstrong was paid $800,000 in 1984, I believe, to settle. That was $800,000 in tax-free cash. In 1984, adjusted for inflation, that's got to be 1.2, 1.3 million. So he was paid, and he signed a non-disclosure agreement. He was 32 years of age, I believe. And then he agreed to turn things back into the church. We owe him for the affirmations, and certainly, but he agreed you can sign non-disclosure agreements. You can sign away your rights to speak on a topic. And then he breached the contract. He was sued by the church for breach of contract. And then he was found in contempt of court by the court, not Scientology. He was given 5 days in jail, Marin County, California. He left the country and became a fugitive. That kicked in the fugitive disentitlement doctrine. So you can't be a fugitive from justice and use the justice system. And the church got a default judgment against him. And that 5 days in Marin, which I think could be quashed, has kept him out of the country. So that's a story for another time, but that's in a nutshell for the claim to be made by Alan Stanfield Alonso that Jerry's case, which is a commercial breach of contract case, they gave him $800,000 and he signed a non-disclosure. And then Jerry turned that into saying you can't sign away your rights to free speech. Well, you can. So if I had a controversy with another party and we both agreed to sign mutual non-disclosures, and there was a settlement made by one side or the other, that's perfectly legal. That's it in a nutshell. You can correct me if I'm wrong. No animus toward Jerry. I've had my fights with him in the past. He attacked me and my wife for I don't think for good reasons, but he attacked a lot of people. So I hope Jerry settles it all out so he can move back down to San Anselmo. I think that sentence up there could be quashed. Ken Moxon, one to renew the judgment, which good luck. That's Ken Moxon is Ken Moxon's an unindicted Guardians, an unindicted Snow White co-conspirator. I mean, we know what Ken Moxon is. So before you bring in Jerry, know the facts. Alan Stanfield doesn't know the facts about a lot of things. Alonso doesn't bother reading the facts. He's incredibly either willfully ignorant or ill-informed or doesn't want to know the facts or doesn't want to study. So enough about that. Susan King. Susan from Australia. Hello, Susan from Australia. I wish we had somebody looking into all the Scientology in Australia because around 2022, they have invested heavily here. Well, Susan, you can start it. I mean, somebody has to start somewhere. It's part of Cause Recce, and you can start doing it. It's sort of like I started the Scientology Money Project like anyone else starts anything else with one post. And I was motivated by the death of Karen's son, Alexander. The church killed him, I felt. And they didn't tell Karen about his death or even let her kiss him goodbye. And then that I've said over and over. That's why I said I'll do whatever I can as one person, at least dismantle the organization and make them easy to understand because Scientology is not complex. So anybody can do anything. And that's why I'm glad SBTV exists. I'm glad the internet exists to expose this. And we have YouTube and we have social media platforms we can share. So I'll post the documents, lay out a basic plan. And beyond that, I need experts. We need experts. We need people just willing to even help. So start your own blog about Australia. Do your research. Start a project for people in Australia, Susan, because it's just ordinary people taking initiative to do stuff. That's what it does to take down the church. I watched Liz Gale's video where she talked to Mitch and Nora, and that was remarkable, just settling things out. Because right now it is right now it's quite turbulent, but that's part of free speech. That's part of a reckoning. There's a lot of things going on, and that's just part of life. But we still have the higher goal to take out the soul killing machine that protects sex criminals, destroys children, and does so many horrendous things. So with that, thank you for listening. This is Jeffrey Augustine for the Scientology Money Project on SPTV. I thank you so much for listening. We're going to go out on some nice music and because we can. So I'll see you next time. And let's see if we have, there we go. Isn't that nice music? No, it's not the right music. This is much better. So enjoy your weekend. Hope you have a great one, and it's been good to see you. And we will see you next time on Scientology Money Project.